I'm Gretchen Helfrich, an attorney here at Loevy Loevy. And with me today is Matt Topic, my colleague who represented Brandon Smith in his FOIA lawsuit to get the city of Chicago to release the videotape of the shooting of Laquan McDonald. First of all, Matt, congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a whirlwind of events in the past few weeks.
I bet it has. Everyone here at the firm obviously is really excited for you and really proud of the work that you've been doing. Tell me a little bit of background about this case, though. How did Brandon Smith become involved, and what were his goals?
Well, Brandon Smith is an independent journalist, a freelancer. He's written on a lot of policing issues, police surveillance issues, and an activist named William Calloway, who Brandon knows, came to Brandon and said, hey, you should really be looking into the Laquan McDonald shooting because a lot of media have been asking for this video and they're not releasing it, and somebody needs to fight it.
And so he came to you, you came to him. How did you get connected with Brandon Smith?
I had been representing him in a different case against the police department, and so he came to me about the FOIA request, and after the city took multiple delays and extensions and just sort of dragged the process out for a long time, we got to the point where we said, we're not going to get this video unless a court orders them to release it.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the FOIA statute works? In other words, why were you able to get this videotape under that statute?
Well, the FOIA statute says that every public record belongs to the public, and the public can have access to any public record, except in a limited number of circumstances where there are other issues, other governmental interests in withholding it. And those are very narrow, and they're all listed in the statute, and the courts don't change those, and they don't make up new ones. It has to fit within an exemption, and the government has to prove that exemption by a heightened evidentiary standard called clear and convincing evidence. All the exemptions have to be narrowly construed, and there's a presumption that every record is subject to disclosure.
So the law is very favorable to disclosure.
It is. There are some exemptions that are poorly worded or vague or things like that, but for the most part, Illinois has a pretty good Freedom of Information Act statute.
Okay, and so what was the city's justification for not disclosing the record?
The city claimed that releasing it would jeopardize ongoing investigations by the Independent Police Review Authority, by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and by the FBI.
And none of those, as I understand it, none of those agencies said, yeah, it would compromise our investigation.
Right. Well, IPRA did submit some affidavits. So for IPRA, there was, at least some arguable evidence purporting to show that it would jeopardize their investigation. The court didn't buy it for any of them and said that it was inadequate, speculative, conclusory. I mean, it didn't provide any real proof that it would jeopardize any investigation. The court also correctly found that is a legal matter interpreting the plain text of those exemptions, that it only applies when the public body who's the recipient of the FOIA request is the public body who's doing the investigation. That was a change that was made to the statute about 5 or 6 years ago after a FOIA suit against the Blagojevich administration, in which they tried to claim that releasing federal subpoenas that had been issued to the governor's office would jeopardize the FBI's investigation. Not long after that, statute gets amended so that one public body can't claim that release of some sort of investigative material would jeopardize someone else's investigation. And really, that makes sense because here it's only randomly almost that Chicago Police Department, was the one who had the video. I mean, you could imagine a scenario where a non-law enforcement agency might similarly be the subject of an FBI investigation, and those other agencies don't get to claim these investigative type of exemptions. So really, CPD tried to say that it was cooperating with the investigations and tried to sort of imply that they were like almost a participant in them when really they were the subject or the employer of the subjects. And so the court reached what was clearly the right conclusion.
Well, so Matt, tell me, what is your take on the response to the release of this video? It's been out about a week now. It was released 8 days ago. So we've seen just tremendous upheaval in the city since then. Are you surprised? Is this what you expected to happen? What's your feeling about it?
I was a little surprised that the city didn't appeal. Their operating procedures from the beginning had been to drag this thing out as long as possible, and I think they wanted to be in a position where they could release the video at the same time that they could announce that charges were being brought against, at the very least, Officer Van Dyke. But they failed in that because the court correctly found that they didn't have a basis to withhold it. And I think all of that was purely for political reasons, that they felt that if they could announce an indictment at the same time as releasing the video, it would soften the blow and it wouldn't make things quite as dramatic. So I was a little surprised that they stopped delaying and just decided that they would go ahead and release it. So somebody must have done a political calculation and decided that they would look bad if they, it would be too much to expect the public to stand by and wait for another, handful of months. Obviously, a lot of things have happened. I don't set out, and my clients don't set out in one of these to hunt for someone's head or get someone fired we mostly go about it, our clients go about it because there's some change they want to effect, or they just want people to know what's happening. And that's been, I think, a great lesson of this, is that if you just give people information about what their government is doing, they'll demand the appropriate changes, and they'll get them a lot of the times. I mean, especially when you have such clear visual video evidence, and I think the idea that video speaks so much more than anything else, and then coupled with the fact that the police clearly put out a false narrative about what happened until they got caught, and that they got caught because there was video. So I think it's it should give hope to people who believe that you can make things change. And an important way to make things change is just to make sure people know what's actually happening.
Now, other information has come out since the video was released, additional videos, and there have been, and as I understand it, Brandon Smith has made additional FOIA requests for information relating to the shooting. What can you say about that?
Yeah, that this is just kind of the beginning of things. I mean, now we know what that officer did. And now we know that Pat Camden lied. And now we know that...
Pat Camden is the head of the Fraternal Order of Police.
Correct. Thanks for
just want to clarify. Not everyone is on a first-name basis with Pat Camden.
Right. So Pat Camden is the spokesman for the Fraternal Order of Police, who immediately put out the narrative that Laquan McDonald was approaching the officers and lunged at them with a knife. That clearly is not what happened. So we now know what happened, and we now know that the narrative was wrong and was probably deliberate. It had to have been deliberately wrong. But what we don't yet know is who knew what, when did they know it, why did they act the way that they did, what impact did the pending mayoral election have on decisions about not releasing the video, why did it take 400 days for the prosecutor's office to charge the officer? Why has no one else been charged? Who else participated in this? Was this Burger King video deleted? Were witnesses shooed away from the scene? I mean, there's so many unanswered questions, and a lot of times this is what we see is you have bad government wrongdoing that's then just followed up by bad government cover-ups. And I think it's something that is going to have to get unwound and will be unwound. I think it's something that the federal investigation may be looking at, but I think it's important for people to know that we ought to see this information, and we ought to be the ones who say so and so should be accountable, and we're not just at the mercy of the FBI to do that for us. And that's really kind of what underlies FOIA, is the idea that people have access to information so they can monitor government and they can hold government accountable.
Well, Matt, in terms of all those issues that you just listed, whose job is it going to be to do those investigations? I mean, we have a little bit of a problem of the fox guarding the henhouse, don't we? I mean, the organizations that have already seemed, or who already seem to be involved in what has gone wrong, are the same ones that would appear to be responsible for finding out why it went wrong.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That I think we have to be a little bit wary when one law enforcement agency is investigating another law enforcement agency. And we need to sort of just be very critical about, are they really aggressively doing that? The Dante Servin prosecution is a great example. Dante Servin, really murdered someone. The state's attorney's office really charged with the wrong crime, and he walked as a result of that. I mean, the judge, I think, really concluded that he intentionally killed someone, but because they charged him with a recklessness-based crime, he walked. And you have to wonder whether that is deliberate or whether that was just woeful incompetence. In either way, it's pretty troubling. And I think that really highlights that people need to really watch these very closely. A similar issue, I think, arose with regard to IPRA. IPRA is charged with disciplining police officers, with making recommendations about training and policy, and really, IPRA is an entity that should have caught on much earlier that Jason Van Dyke, was really headed down the wrong path that could have ended the way that it ended.
Now, are you saying that because Jason Van Dyke had so many complaints against him?
Yeah, so Jason Van Dyke had 18 complaints against him. Jason Van Dyke was the defendant in a civil rights suit in which a jury found by a preponderance of the evidence that he used excessive force and significantly injured someone. He was never punished for any of that. There were multiple complaints about racial slurs and excessive force. He was never punished for any of that. And in any given complaint, IPRA has to look at the facts and decide, are these substantiated or not? And everyone's entitled to due process and to a fair hearing, and we shouldn't judge people just by accusations. But when you have 18 complaints, somebody has to start looking at it and saying, just at a macro level, what's going on here with this officer? And he was in about the 15th percentile in terms of number of complaints, which means that 14% of the officers on the force had more complaints. So there really has never been, there doesn't seem to have been any sort of early warning system or monitoring system or anything that said, even if we can't discipline this officer for these, something's going on here. Maybe he needs more training. Maybe he needs to be relieved of, the most challenging neighborhoods and needs to get a little time off, in a different area. Maybe there, is some sort of policy change that needs to be made. But you can't just sit by and watch while 18 complaints rack up.
Do you see any effort being made to move towards a system where that kind of early warning system will be put in place? I'm asking you that because as I've seen this coverage that's been going on in the last week or so, there's so much talk about police misconduct and individual acts of misconduct and much less focus on the system or anything that goes on around that misconduct. There's kind of like, how do we stop Officer Van Dyke from doing something? Well, is that really the entirety of the problem? It seems like there's some bigger problems, and the organizational issues maybe are not as sharp, seem to me to be not as sharply in focus as maybe they need to be.
Yeah, we've seen that the mayor's comments on this have evolved from it's not appropriate to release the video, there's ongoing investigations, to one bad cop who did a bad thing, to now we have a task force that's going to look at all this. And I think that's all been just reacting to what the public has been demanding and just adapting to that in recognizing that the mayor has to acknowledge that that's what people are demanding and what people are entitled to. So I think we're getting there. We're getting to a broader look at the systems and what's going on, and an acknowledgement that this isn't just one-off bad apples. There's a problem with the system. So it's these are all problems that have existed for a long time. These are all problems that the mayor's office and the police department and IPRA and sort of anyone else in a position of power have known about for a very long time. Nothing has changed other than this video has been released, and so it's good that we're at least talking about the fact that there is a wide problem and it needs a big solution. And it shouldn't have taken the release of a shooting video that exposed police cover up to get to the point where we're having that conversation, but at least we're having that conversation. So I think it's a great thing that the release of the video has really forced, and I do mean forced, the hand of the mayor to acknowledge the problem and to at least get us started towards fixing it. Now it will all really turn on how deep of a dive, how diligent of a job is going to be done. Is this a serious effort to change, or is this just the politically expedient thing that needed to be done? That you have to call for a task force because that's part of the playbook in these scenarios. Is you sort of, it's an isolated problem. Okay, now I admit it's a little bit bigger problem. Now I'm going to call a task force. Some answer to everything so that the public feels like something's being done. We'll see where this task force comes out, and then we'll see what those recommendations are and whether they're good ones and whether those are followed and implemented.
One last question, Matt. I want to ask you about the role of the media, both in what has gone on so far and going forward. The FOIA statute that Brandon Smith used or took advantage of isn't just for journalists, it's for anybody. But journalists make a lot of use of FOIA requests to get information from the government. But here's Brandon Smith, this independent journalist. There are lots of other media organizations who could also have been asking for this video. Where has the media been on this, and where do you think they need to be going forward?
I think that for a long time, the city, both this administration and the prior administration, have sort of just worn down the press by, denying all kinds of requests for information, being difficult, and maybe creating a situation where, people in kind of the mainstream media, so to speak, have sort of come to accept, an unacceptable situation. And it may be that it just sort of required somebody kind of new enough, who hadn't been beaten down for years, to say, you know what, I am going to fight this. Maybe we can fight it. And so I think, I hope that sort of reinvigorates the media in Chicago generally to understand that that the law is being abused all the time, but there is something that can be done about it, and you can get the right decision if you're willing to fight for it.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Thanks very much for talking to me.
My pleasure.